Hello and welcome to our third episode of our unofficial SAP on Azure video podcast. Today is July 31st, and together with Robert and Goran, I'm here to talk about anything related to SAP on Azure. Today, we're going to have three main topics, and we'll close our podcast today with a new format, something about, well, you didn't dare to ask. So let's see how this goes. We'll talk about high availability. Then we'll talk about the Azure Cloud Shell. We'll take a look at the SAP Discovery Center. And again, at the end, we'll cover one last final topic. So hello, everyone.
Hi. Hello.
Good. So let's start with high availability. You might have seen, actually, let me share my screen. A colleague of ours just published another very interesting blog where it's all about how to set up a high availability environment with SAP HANA in scale out on SLES, on SUSE Linux. Again, we'll post the blog under the video, but it's a pretty interesting document. So the blog is relatively short, but in the blog there's a rather long Word document that really outlines the steps on how to set up such an environment, and it really gets started. How to set up the your operating system and stuff like that. How to set up the cluster. It's a really nice document. So if you are interested in setting up such a HANA high available setup on SLES, I think that's definitely worth taking a look at.
Sure. Maybe I would always just edit such kind of end-to-end documents are very liked by the partners and customers, but I would always kind of urge always to check the official documentation on the end, because the things are always changing. So it's there's always some new stuff, there is some best practices, and these kind of you can always be sure that the official documents are always approved, and best practices and updated part. It's very difficult to update the already pushed documentation. So always keep an eye on the official documentation as well.
Absolutely, that's a very good point, and I think these documents that are published via the community, they're great as a first guide or something like that. But as you said, you should always check the SAP notes to see what is actually certified. You should check docs.microsoft.com with all the updates where there's the official documentation as well.
Correct.
Cool. Good. So that's the thing where we talk about high availability on Linux. But Goran, I think you have also some interesting things about high availability on Windows.
Right. So, maybe just one point about which Windows version to use or what would be recommended. We do support multiple Windows versions, which can be used also in the clustering, but maybe not. There's people are not so much aware about recommendation, for example, to use Windows 2019, as a cluster machine. So the one reason is that Windows 2019 is Azure aware. Mm-hmm. So, for example, which is not the case with the previous version. So let me maybe just quickly share my screen as well, just to give you show you a few stuff live. So come on, Teams. Okay. All right. So you got something, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, for example, this is an interesting part because I'm also using a Bastion. Maybe that could be also a topic where I can connect. I'm using a SID ADM user basically to connect through the secure web browser to the Windows desktop, and you can do it also the same. Let me reconnect. Maybe my network it's disconnecting, where you can use on RDP on a Windows and SSH is on a Linux. Oops, this is really not what I would love to see it during this recording.
Third time is a charm. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just to double check. I'm a Windows 2019, and if you would run, for example, get cluster and format list to get the cluster properties, which are maybe not in the UI, notice you will see something like detected cloud platform is Azure. Right. So what does that mean? You know, one interesting part is, for example, if I would go to another machine, which is Windows 2016, just to show you. So basically, I have adjusted 2 nodes. Cluster, okay, it's an SAP central services is running. And basically, if you would just quickly check, you know, in some cluster properties, okay, I'm using Cloud Witness, which is nice. Cluster has, of course, an host name, virtual host name, and IP address. And if I would go to the Windows 2019, yes, I also have a Cloud Witness. I have a host name, but I do not have an IP address. This means basically in Windows 2019, there's something called distributed network name, which means that basically you have a virtual host name, but this host name is using any of the local cluster IP addresses. So it does not have a dedicated IP address like in Windows 2016, but it uses any IP address. So it's similar like a scale-out file server. So for example, if I would go, let me see if I can connect to the domain controller. Basically, it comes an interesting part. You see, this is I don't know if you can see it. These are the 2 nodes of the cluster S4H with 10, 29, 1, 15, and 16. But this is the virtual host name, and it has also the same 2 IP addresses. So I mean, you can connect. Why do you need this host name of the cluster if you want? Sometimes you want to connect to the cluster so that from outside to that cluster to manage it, right? Mm-hmm. And in the Windows 2016, because it has a dedicated IP address, this means that you need to also configure this IP address on an Azure load balancer. So in Windows 2019, you say one IP address because you use the local IP addresses of the cluster nodes. B, you do not have to do any additional configuration on Azure load balancer. So that would be, let's say, an easier management part. But another I mean, even I would say more interesting part is basically that there is an awareness of the cluster about the Azure host maintenance. So meaning, you know, from time to time, we would do a different maintenance activities on the Azure hosts. And it would be very nice if you would know that something is that cluster software and an operating system is aware. So let me just show you quickly on the presentation here. I mean, yes, there is an Windows 2019. Windows cluster is aware of the cluster maintenance, and basically this can help us to troubleshoot, for example, the certain disconnection state, for example. So those maintenance events you would see in the cluster log, but you would also see in the Windows log. So these are kind of 3 examples. There is the kind of node maintenance is imminent, about to occur. I mean, it's detected, and there is reschedule. And this is how it could look like, for example, 1139, that it is detected, and below you would see freeze resource. So sometimes we do this kind of 10 to 20 seconds freeze of the resource, and that can cause that maybe cluster node would be disjoint because there is no heartbeat. So we can also, it's also interesting that there are kind of these kind of cluster properties called detected managed events, where you can basically define what do you want to do with this. So in Azure, there is a property 0 is don't log. On Azure, there is default 1, it's do log, and that's the default. Number 2 or value 2 would be avoid placement on that node. So meaning if there is there would be no new role would be placed on that node if possible. 3 would be do a pause and drain, meaning fail over everything to something else. And also 4 would be pause, drain, and fall back. And the another one would be a detect, manage events threshold, meaning, okay, if you decide to do something about this, default value is a 60-second, or which you can change, you know. So basically you can also check this kind of events. For example, again, if you go to this get cluster, and then you would see, okay, detect, manage events, it's 1, meaning just log. And this is default the threshold. If you define something else to do it after 60 seconds, you will do it. So very, very valuable. I mean, to understand what's going on, to see it, you know, and decide by yourself, okay, you want to do it something, depend on the host maintenance type, or let the cluster do for you.
And I think the beautiful thing here is that Windows is really aware of this, because I think on Linux, obviously what I would do, I would query this metadata URL, this 169.259,
correct,
whatever, and I would need to poll and retrieve this information, parse the results and stuff like that. But here with Windows 2019, Windows is aware of Azure, so that's why all this information is available, and I could react on these events directly.
Correct.
And
very nice.
And you mentioned because of this awareness, we don't need to set some additional settings on load balancer, but we still need load balancer, correct? On Azure.
Exactly, we still need, that's an exactly excellent point. We still need load balancer, so we do not need a load balancer for the IP address of the cluster, but we do need a load balancer and IP configuration for all other clustered resource like SAP Central Services, like database. We do need that. That's an excellent point. Yes, exactly. So there is actually one very good video blog by John Marlin and a PM on the cluster team, and also one also other blog, text blog, which talks. So we can add below in the as a link, so which goes more into details. It's not a new stuff. I mean, it's already known, maybe a year or something like this, but people are not aware. And always there's sometime it can help when you discuss about, okay, shall I use 2016 or 2019?
Yeah.
So that would be, I would say, a positive motivation to go for the higher version of the Windows because of those new features, which are basically only in Azure Cloud available. Also, I mean, you're on the latest and greatest version of the Windows, meaning you don't have to worry about upgrading to the other versions higher because you are pushed by SAP or by whoever.
Great. No, perfect, Goran. Thank you. I think that's extremely helpful. And you mentioned something interesting. So you started with using Bastion, which obviously allows you to connect via a browser to your virtual machine in a secure way. And that's actually a beautiful segue when we talk about the Azure Cloud Shell. So let me try to share my screen. Maybe in a second you can also show the Azure Cloud Shell and just talk what it is, or show what it is. In the end, it allows me to open a Bash or PowerShell prompt directly in the browser and do some operations out of this. And what we just announced, I think yesterday or the day before, was that now the container image for Azure Cloud Shell is actually open source. So on GitHub, if you go to github.com/Azure/CloudShell, you can see the image that we are using when you actually call shell.azure.com. And the beautiful thing here is that you can really look at all the tools that are available in this Cloud Shell. You can also create a pull request if you think there's a tool that would be interesting for you. But I think that's a really great first step. Or obviously you can also use this on-prem. If you really want to test out this container on-prem, then just download it and give it a try. So I think it's a really nice step to open up to show what we're actually doing in the Cloud Shell.
Yeah, And I would also say, basically, I mean, I just realized a few days ago, and I kind of really delighted me. You see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically on the top button there is a shell, you know, which you can enable it. There is also a PowerShell, which is interesting, running on under Linux. I mean, it's a crazy. There's Microsoft can do those kind of stuff. But what kind of, it's really very, it's very reactive, beautiful shell. But what was kind of delighted me to realize, again, it's not a new stuff, but you know, for the Visual Studio Code, there is a Microsoft free open source tool run on Windows, Mac, and I also install on a SLES Enterprise, for example. Of course, you need an UI enabled. But many Linux admins would actually work in the shell, right? So there is an interesting, also a light version of the Visual Studio Code. You just type the code, and basically it would open you a very rich, beautiful kind of user interface. Not so rich like the desktop version, but really amazing. So basically, look, I am just kind of doing a copy, you know, and I'm doing Control C and Control V, you know, and I have all those now. It's complaining, yeah, there is a duplicate objects, you know, and on the left side I can also navigate. Okay, I will say don't save, you know, through the, for example, if you work with the Terraform, again, you also have very beautiful, very responsive. It's actually integrated Visual Studio Code for the Cloud Shell. I mean, and me being a kind of more spoiled Microsoft Windows child, you know, struggling with the VI. I mean, this is a revolution, you know, when I need to. So warm and welcome. Many people would use it too, also for the automation, for the Terraform, for the ARM templates again. So, I mean,
you don't have to use VI anymore.
You don't have to use VI, exactly. Right.
No, so I think it's really nice, and there are really quite a few tools that are now available on Cloud Shell, and it's great to see Visual Studio Code here as well.
There's one additional feature for Cloud Shell which I think people somehow ignore, because when you first create a Cloud Shell, he will ask you for the storage account. Yeah. And most of the colleagues think, okay, this is probably some storage account where those images provisioning and so on, whatever. Yeah, but this storage account is actually a very nice feature. Yeah, for example, I always have one storage account, and when I start a Cloud Shell and say, okay, use this storage account, actually I'm getting one like additional mount on that Cloud Shell. Yeah, where I can store all my scripts or this coding what Goran is now presenting, and I can somehow have that the same share across all my these Cloud Shells. So, you know, when I'm writing some scripts, I can simply go on the same share, pull my scripts, and do it what I need to do. Yeah. So this is a very nice feature. This you can share across your Cloud Shell instances. Yeah, it's very, very nice. Yeah? And
because the Azure, I mean, the PowerShell version, it's using the Linux. Again, you can also use it, what Robert said, also for storing the file and loading from PowerShell.
Exactly.
For example.
And be careful, this PowerShell is core PowerShell, is not, of course, full Windows PowerShell version. PowerShell core is getting better and better, but it is still Azure PowerShell core, so you cannot, of course, expect that you will invoke some commands what you have on the standard full-blown PowerShell on Windows. Yeah. Right. Not yet.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Okay, great, cool.
Great, yeah, thank you. Good, with this, let's do a cut topic-wise. One thing that I quickly want to talk about is the SAP Discovery Center, and actually let me also share my screen again. So this is something that not only became relevant right now as part of the SAP Embrace reference custom use cases. So actually, if you go to sap.com/embrace-use cases, then you get to these use cases that we jointly have created with SAP and Microsoft. But the interesting thing is now if I select one of these use cases, and if you scroll to the very bottom, and maybe at some point in time we can take a look at these use cases, but what I want to show you here down in the resource center, there are these trainings that are part of the SAP Discovery Center. So if you go to the Discovery Center, there SAP has a lot of tutorials, really step-by-step tutorials that allow you to create scenarios that run on the SAP Cloud Platform, but obviously in our case, that show this interoperability between the SAP Cloud Platform and Microsoft Azure. And it really guides you through the steps. In this case, for example, you need an Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Azure, obviously, and then a few components also from the SAP Cloud Platform. But then you can really start a mission and go through a real tutorial. There are also support persons behind it that actually help you in case if you're facing some issues, if there are some errors or whatever. So I think that's also a beautiful offering that SAP has here, where you're really guided through certain use case scenarios. So I think that's definitely something that you could also check out.
Nice.
Great.
Good. I think we're almost at the end of our official topics that we had. But like I said, we wanted to end with something that we called something about you didn't dare to ask. And I think Robert has prepared some topic for today's episode.
Yeah, so yeah, correct. I mean, idea is that just we briefly present you some stuff from Azure, like network, like storage, and so on. But just show you some tips and tricks which you are maybe not aware of. For some guys, will be probably very good, nice refresh from the knowledge perspective. So I'm on the Azure documentation. So standard Azure documentation. I'll just click on Architecture Center, select the browse architectures, and just go on the networking session, open the architectures, and click the, for example, hub and spoke. So this is our repository for all reference architecture. There's also SAP there, reference architecture, but today I want to discuss about this networking. Why networking is always very interesting, because, when we are migrating something from on-premise, we try to follow all those rules, what we learn, what is the best practices on the premise, and we are transferring that to Azure. There's nothing wrong with that. And one of the usual network patterns is hub and spoke pattern. There's nothing new. We are using that pattern also on the premise all the time. But in most cases, sometimes people does not understand what that reflects to when we are discussing about that in Azure. So, for example, when we have a hub and spoke, so this means this part and these parts are individual networks, and this gray stuff here, this is a subnet in every network what we defined. So in general, hub and spoke is very nice for separation of all services which I need to share in my hub through all my spokes. But we must understand what is very important here, that communication here between the different network is not free. So be careful of that. Yeah, this is true. This is something like 1 cent per gigabyte. This is not big money, but be careful about that. Also, when we have a gateway in our hub and we are somehow communicating from this direction, and of course, in the other direction, we have also some traffic here which we need to pay. So this is also one cost on the end. So sometimes people think that, okay, if I now somehow communicate over this spoke network, over my hub, over the gateway in the direction of the on-premise, that somehow sounds like, okay, I will have a cost on this side and I will have a cost on this side. Actually, this is not true. This is, if we enable this transition over the gateway, this is a setting which we need to enable, then actually what we are, when we are communicating from in this case, spoke 1 over the hub, on the VPN gateway and in the direction of the premise, we are just paying the traffic on the gateway side. So we are not paying any more traffic here. So we don't have let's call it double charging. But be careful, if we are continue communicating from spoke to hub and from hub to spoke, then this charging applies. So this is small tips and tricks regarding this sizing and the configuration on the networking side. Also, ask yourself, do you really want to have this multiple network, because the multiple network are good from isolation perspective, but more or less you can say the same isolation you can have on the spoke side and using NSGs, yeah. Because if you want to somehow apply role-based access control, yeah, on the resource level, then you need to split across the network. So let's say you want to have more control over security, who is creating your virtual network, who is changing your virtual networks, then it's a good idea to split that. But if you don't have that requirements, you can actually organize your network in one virtual network and split your somehow your isolation levels or your landscape in different subnets. Yeah. So think about that, and everything is here explained in the hub spoke network topology in Azure, and also there's some related link where you can go much deeper to understand what is the best way of organizing network in Azure. So that's all.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think, and I yes, this is maybe not a new topic, but I think it's always good to have these short refreshers and also your insights there. So I think that's.
Although I hear also from time to time, surprise customer, why do I have extra charges?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's not something which you can expect that you will get some extra 1,000 and something euros. Yeah, you'll extra 100, 200 euros, but it's not pleasant when the customer expects something lower, and especially when you are talking about managed service provider, when they promise, okay, dear customer, your cost will be 2,000, and so. But we'll discuss about this cost in other our sessions, yeah, and how to optimize costs, how to monitor costs, and so on.
So lots of more topics on the agenda for future episodes.
Yep.
Well, good. I think. That's it. I think with this we can wrap it up. Thank you. I hope this was useful for everyone, and I hope to see you or hear you next week again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.